Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we have some final thoughts on the recently released NBA schedule, and more importantly, Damian Lillard gets candid with Jim Owczarski of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. His offseason so far, all the chatter that he has heard, and what he has planned for this upcoming season. We dive into that story coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Camille, we shared some thoughts on the NBA schedule as it was being released on yesterday's show. So if you did miss that, go back and check YouTube and your podcasts for that one for some in-the-moment instant reactions to that schedule. As we were processing that, we've had some time to digest it a little more. So we'll share some final takeaways on that coming up a little bit later on today's show. But today we really wanted to spend some time on Damian Lillard because, look, he's going to carry a lot of importance. I think that's the understatement of the century for the Bucks this upcoming season. We touched on when the season ended, Dame being candid in that end of season press conference following Game 6 against the Indiana Pacers, where he himself talked about his conditioning level, where it was at. That's come out a few times more in the offseason. He said after Game 6 against the Pacers, I'm going to come back, essentially in these words, I'm going to come back better next year. And I really do think people are going to be surprised when they see me. He had a chance, Jim Owczarski of the Journal-Sentinel had a chance to catch up with him at his summer league or his summer camp that's going on in Beaverton, Oregon right now. And we heard more of the same from Dame, but some interesting details that were in that story as well. So I want to get your take on what stood out the most for, frankly, a lot of stuff we've already heard. But I guess we'll start here is in that very first paragraph in this story from Jim Owczarski, which if you have not read, by all means, go check it out on the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. We got to learn the current Bucks assistants that are out there as we speak with Dame. We saw some pictures and everything else before that. Marjan, I think AJ Green, and AJ Johnson have all kind of gone through that routine with Dame so far this offseason. But the assistant coaches that are out there working with him as well.
Yeah, we saw that Rex Kleinman was out there, as well as Donovan Ham, which was a name that me and you were both throwing around like, oh, was he officially announced as the staff person for the Milwaukee Bucks? So we lost Justin for a second, but I'm sure we'll get him back shortly. But within that, seeing the fact that you have the Bucks coaches out there working with Damian Lillard right now is one of those things too, where you're just like, I love to see that they're out there. The article mentions the fact that although the Bucks coaches are out there, the only thing that was different within that was that there were some actions in his workout where it was things that the Bucks are going to be running. But for the most part, it was a full speed workout for Dame that he normally does get the chance to do, which, as we know, last offseason, he didn't have as many chances to have his normal routine. So he talked a lot about that, as well as just the time that he's been spending working with other Bucks players and just getting himself right and ready for this upcoming season. Because to your point, Justin, there aren't that many things that he mentioned that were like, oh, this is extremely brand new. But what always gets me with Dame is just his level of transparency that he has when he's speaking with people. It's just really honest, really transparent. And he acknowledged, like, I didn't perform to my normal standards last year with the Bucks. Like, although I gave you 26 and 7 assists, like, I know I can be better than it, and I know I didn't feel right. And he mentioned that there's only 2 times in his career where he knew he didn't feel right. One being last year and the other time in 2022 when he was dealing with some injuries. But his level of transparency always stands out to me personally.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit with Melanie Ricks as well, and just Damian Lillard's approach and what makes him easygoing, and the type of guy that in talking to him in those situations, you get the sense of you have this type of relationship or friendship, and you know him. And I think that comes through in this story from Jim and the Journal Sentinel. As well as you mentioned, it's a lot of stuff that we have heard before, but I think just hearing some more detail.
Yeah.
And look, Dame is a smart guy too, in that he knows he's putting a target on himself with these types of stories of, I wasn't in the greatest conditioning, or at least where I've been in the past and where I needed to be, and talking through the reasons why. And people can kind of dissect that and say, well, how could you not be working out? Or how could you not be doing this or that? But hearing some of the rationale, and it's not as if Damian Lillard didn't step foot on a treadmill and didn't log 5,000 steps in a day. He was just kind of taking it easy. The intensity and the workouts and things that you would do to get yourself ready for an NBA season, that wasn't there because of the fear of, what if I do something? What if I hurt myself? And then I've requested this trade. What happens then? So he knows by doing this, by talking about the conditioning, by talking about things he's worked on, where he was at a season ago, taking the conditioning out of it, the injuries, everything that went on off the court. I think there is an understanding. You and I have talked about this quite a bit, Camille, too. I forget how you put it perfectly. It's the how much of it is the reason and how much of it is an actual excuse here. That's what he's going to be up against this season, and he knows that. So I think the fact that he's confident enough to come out and say X, Y, and Z, these things happen, here's the things that I've worked on, I know I'm going to be better next season, that to me is very encouraging if I'm a Bucks fan.
Yeah, he knows that and he acknowledges that, which again is what I love about Damian Lillard and having the last year with him here in Milwaukee. It's just that level of transparency and his honesty with everything as well. He mentioned like the injuries. He mentioned the fact that, how the offseason went. And then the article, a line that stood out to me was that Dame was always chasing himself last season, where he was trying to feel more like himself. And then you think about the timeline, which we've discussed before, but he gets to Milwaukee days before training camp. You have Terry Stotts in there who has his offense and installing that, but then he leaves and then you get a different offense. Then you get a different coach halfway through the season. A lot of different changes. You're learning to play with Giannis. You're learning to play with Chris, having the lowest usage rate of his career, which is something that we assumed would happen when you come to play with another player that likes to have the ball in his hands. Fewest shots up, fewest threes up. The numbers just did not look like Dame, but to hear him embracing the challenge of like, you think I can't do this, but let me show you that I can, is what I'm really excited about with that. And with this team as a whole, because we've been seeing the little things from everybody, from Dame, from Giannis, of just like, oh, that's interesting. No, Christmas Day. Okay, cool. Oh, you don't think I can still do this? Cool. Here we come. And I love that this team is approaching this season with a lot to prove.
The early in the story too, when we learn Rex Kalamian is out there as one of the assistants that is working him out and going through these drills. Donovan Ham, we mentioned as well, still some ambiguity of, okay, is Donovan not an assistant coach per se, but part of the Bucks staff in development there, or was this a typo for Darvin Ham? But multiple members of the Bucks organization out there. We talked about players that have been out there with Damian Lillard before, and just the chip on his shoulder, which has driven him all the way to where he is now. When you talk about from Oakland to Ogden to Portland to where he is now as a member of the Bucks and one of the 75 greatest players in NBA history. But that part in the story, when we get a glimpse at some of these things, these rigorous workouts and drills and shooting drills that Damian Lillard is going through with Rex Kalamian, talking about his legs on fire and burning, and taking some pull-up threes, and Rex Kalamian asking him, are you better than Steph? And the line in there of just watch. And then it was 9 or 10 in a row that he drained after that.
You love, like, again, you love to hear that. And a piece that stood out to me in addition to what you mentioned was Dame was saying, like, I'm not a player that's breaking down. Like, I live a good life. I take care of my body. I'm good. I can do the same stuff that I was doing 2 or 3 years ago. But now the question is, what does it look like on this team for me to be Damian Lillard? And I think that piece of the equation is, again, where Doc Rivers comes in, of trying to make the pieces make sense, making sure everybody understands their roles and how the offense is going to flow. And listen, that whole coming into the season with the chip on the shoulder, I like that. Like, it's the Bucks are in such an interesting position because I feel like they're a team that is simultaneously under a lot of pressure, but also a team that's under the radar, which is a weird juxtaposition of emotions to feel like your team is entering the season in. But like, that's how I see the Bucks going into the 2024-25 season.
It's going to be a very interesting season. There's a lot more interesting things too that came out of this story. And look, the big piece that we can't quantify, but it is the biggest piece to all of this, and that's life on and off the court for Damian Lillard. We got to see some of that in this story as well. So we'll get into some more thoughts on the profile of Damian Lillard, his camp in Beaverton, Oregon, and what the offseason has been like thus far for Dame, coming up next year on Locked On Bucks. Well, time to talk to you now about our friends over at Game Time. And look, we've shared our stories about using other ticketing services and using Game Time. And the major differences you see when you use Game Time for those tickets. You can save last minute on killer deals where you find 60% or more savings when you buy last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater events, and more. They offer flash deals as well, where you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats when you're buying in advance. Maybe you're using Game Time to tick off some baseball stadiums or other experiences outside of your market, and that's where their all-in pricing feature and seat views come in very, very handy. You can see a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy those tickets. And I mentioned the all-in price. You just toggle on that feature, and it shows you the total upfront price you will pay with no sticker shock or surprise fees at checkout. And best of all, Game Time comes with the lowest price guarantee, where they will credit you 110% of the difference if you can find those seats cheaper. You get all of that, I should say, with that experience and the purchase covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, to get $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So, Camille, a few other things that stood out. I mean, really, it all kind of revolves around this. And that was the middle part of the story, when it's the elephant in the room. And that is hey, by the way, all these things that we talked about, drills that he's doing, the condition that he feels that he's in, that he wasn't in last year. You mentioned how he said just didn't feel right for large portions of the season last year. You had some time, rehab may be a bit strong, but to rest and improve upon all of that. But oh, by the way, he knows where he's going to be playing, who his teammates are, and where he's going to be living. He didn't know any of that until a week before training camp began last season. And that's where we say, I don't know how you quantify how important that is, but what I do know is it is important.
It's very important. I say it often. This is not NBA 2K. Like, you can't just make a trade and then everything works out perfectly. Like, there is an off the court element of that. We know the personal things that he was going through. And again, a lot of people look at it and say, like, that's an excuse. You're trying to make things up for Dame, so on and so forth. But as said in this article, he doesn't need any excuses. He's just telling you what happened. These are reasons as to why things did not work out for him. Reason or excuse? Some people are going to say it's an excuse. I look at it more so as a reason for Dame's performance. And to your point about the continuity playing a big part in this upcoming season, he mentioned in this article at the Journal Sentinel that he's been in constant communication with Giannis, with Chris, with Bobby Portis. And we know he has a relationship already with Gary Trent Jr. and with DeLon Wright. So there's a lot of familiarity with him coming back to this team, even with the new additions that the team has made. Like, he has connections with two of the new guys coming aboard on the team this year. And we already saw he's been doing some work with the rookie, with AJ Johnson. So like, he is really building on the continuity aspect and really working to make sure that when the season starts, these guys are going to be on the same page. And I don't know how you can be a Bucks fan and not love to hear that.
You know what else was interesting was, as Jim points out, so this camp has gone on for 10 or so years, I believe. it's been the same time or around that same time on the calendar every year. Last year, he had requested the trade in July. So there was a lot of uneasiness, weirdness. Like it was just strange to be this pillar and this fixture in the community out there in the Portland area. And, Portland fans didn't hold it against Damian Lillard. They knew it was Dame going in one direction, the organization in another, but it was still this strange, yeah, he wants to be traded, but he's still doing the camp here. I mean, it would be like if Brett Favre is doing a softball game and coming back to Green Bay, essentially. But talking in that story too about, not only is this the first camp I've done where I've been a part of the Bucks, but even seeing kids come into this camp where it wasn't necessarily 50-50, but seeing kids that are wearing Damian Lillard Bucks jerseys out there in Portland, a part of this camp.
It goes to show just what a fixture he has become in that community. And that's the whole point that I think the article was getting at, in addition to the work that he's been doing to get ready for this upcoming season, which is his roots are really in Portland now. Like, he has really created a life out there with a lot of community that he cares about, not just the family members that live out there, not just his kids, but the community itself, mentioning the fact that there are kids who have come to his camp every year and he's watched them grow up, where now he's like, man, I'm getting old, which if you are somebody who has like nieces and nephews, or you have children, seeing them get older is really what puts in perspective, like, man, I really am getting older at this point. So I loved hearing that personal aspect of Dame's life as well, how much this means to him to be somebody who's a fixture in the community, to be somebody who's been consistent to what they have going out there. And they're also a routine of, hey, we know this summer, like, it's the Dame camp and it's still happening, which is, it's really cool to hear that he has that personality, and it fits in a bit of what you hear about the type of character guys that the Milwaukee Bucks like to have in their locker room, where it's a lot. It's what's the old line, a no asshole locker room. Like, you just got to make sure it's a bunch of guys really coming in there, with a good character. Even with Pat Bev coming last year, like, he had some moments for sure, but all
with Dame.
Yeah, with Dame in the past as well, with some fans in Indy as well. But listen, that Pat Bev, he messed with that equation a little bit, but it was something that the Bucks and themselves that they
really
needed,
tested it.
He tested it for sure. He had a little razzle dazzle into that equation to see how they would handle it. But yeah, I love having Dame here.
It's like when I suppose it depends on what it's referred to wherever it is you went. Middle school and high school for me, it wasn't junior high or prep or any of that. But if you go to different middle schools with somebody that you grew up with, your childhood friends, and then you go to different middle schools, but you reunite at high school, and that friend has their own new clique of friends that you try to intertwine of, hey, this is my buddy so-and-so, and you kind of give the side eye of, I'm not sure about this guy, really, and no, trust me. That was kind of the Doc with Pat Beverly experience last year. Like, trust me, guys, I know how to handle him. He's cool. He's perfectly fine. But yeah, and now that experiment is done with. But it was to wrap up on the Dame thing, 11 straight years, excluding the COVID year, and just there's a lot of it where when the trade was made, we talked about on the basketball court how it made sense, but your line too about the character in the locker room and no a-holes. That, I mean, largely has been the case for the Bucks for the better part of 7 years now. The culture that they've assembled and just how these guys fit together. When you started to hear more about Damian Lillard, other than all the surface level stuff that we already knew about Dame the person and Dame the player, but when you started to hear from people in the Portland area, people with the Blazers that would share stories as well, as corny as it sounds, it really felt like, man, this guy, he's just like Giannis and Chris and the rest of these guys, where he's the most unassuming and humble and approachable type of superstar that there is. And this story was littered with stories like that of, kids wearing Dame jerseys, parents there showing pictures of their kid that was a baby or months old that Dame is taking pictures with. Parents even asking Dame, hey, do you remember this kid when he comes back? And Damian Lillard remembering them. So that to me was the part where look, he's one of the 75 greatest players of all time, but it's the stuff like that where it just feels like we're Midwest nice, that this just fits. This is supposed to work. This is why this trade made the most sense. And this is why we really want to see this come to fruition. And everything that Dame has said, I know I didn't hold up my end of the bargain is probably a bit harsh, but all the things that he said, it's why you're rooting for it even more.
You are. And that Midwest nice thing is funny because it's like Milwaukee Bucks nice is like, in the locker room, good character guys. You come into work, you're trying to get your ball done, you're trying to get better, and then you go home and do what you're going to do. But on the court, just a really crazy level of competition, like of competitive nature within them. And that chip of like, I'm one of the greatest. Like I've loved all of the Nike winning isn't everything campaign that they've been having going on with Giannis and everybody like that. But it fits the mentality of it where it's like, we know Giannis, he comes into the media, the press conferences, and he's jovial, he's making jokes, and he has that character, but on the court, he's looking to like demolish guys over and over and over. And with Dame in this article made it clear as well of like, listen, I know that there's some young guys coming up, and I get it because I was one of those young guys at one point too, where you come on the scene, you're making a lot of noise, and the attention is on you. And then some of the older guys, now the question is, well, I don't think they have it anymore. And he looks like he's really up for that challenge of proving like, oh, I still have it, and I have it in spades. So like, come and get this if you really want it. And I love that energy as well. Like, yeah, great. Be a great person off the court. And on the court, I want you to be a maniacal bully. Like, I want you to go about your business in the way where people have fear of playing against you. And Dame also has that aspect, his personality, as well as a Chris and a Giannis. It looks different, but they have that approach to the game as well, which I think also makes that fit so well within that Bucks locker room with Dame and everyone else.
Yeah, and I think the last thing to point out from this story here was one of the last quotes from Dame in the story where he talked about, I didn't have a chance to get myself in order, and I was still dealing with the whirlwind of the trade and everything else. And I immediately had to push forward into the season, into learning a new teammate. And there was just one thing after another, the personal stuff, the relationship he had with Terry Stotts. That's not the relationship, but Terry Stotts is gone just as the season is starting. Another coaching change. And as Dame said, I don't participate in the weak-minded stuff. So I'm going to go out there. I'm going to put on a brave face, keep showing up and doing my job. But these were the types of adjustments that I think we discount and diminish and kind of lose sight of. Think about any of us in our day-to-day jobs or anything that you deal with. Oh, I don't care. Just, push forward and be the same person that you were, regardless of what you're dealing with. But I think the one thing that should inspire, not the one thing, but one of the things that should inspire this sense of confidence and assurance of, okay, I do feel like this is going to be a better turnaround. As Dame pointed out, there's no lingering issues or injuries from anything that he dealt with last season. But perhaps most importantly, the quote of, I'm not a player that's breaking down. I live a clean, good, healthy life, so I can do it. I can do the same stuff I did 2 or 3 years ago. I can do it right now. It's just a matter of what does it look like on this team.
Yep. And finding that answer is going to be a key piece for the Bucks as they try to get that championship, because that's something that we looked at last season where it's like, it doesn't seem to be fitting all together well. It feels like my turn, your turn a lot. So if they can get that piece of it down, again, I have a lot of optimism around the Milwaukee Bucks this upcoming season, even with, I know we're going to get to it in the next segment, even with a pretty difficult schedule to start and to end the season for the Bucks.
By all means, if you have not, go out and read the story that Jim Ozarski put together in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, some of those quotes and other things that we did not get to in this brief recap of that. We mentioned the schedule. We talked about it at length yesterday on the show. We'll share some final thoughts and some other things that popped up with that schedule coming up next year on Locked On Bucks. Well, we all love sports so much that we never want them to stop. But the playoffs have wound down, so we're getting fewer games now, and the sports just aren't sporting like we want them to. Luckily, FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. So there's something for everyone every day all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And Camille and I thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There is no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Also for Bucks fans, I talked with Josh Lloyd just a couple of days ago. That's going to run this weekend on the Locked On Fantasy basketball site. But it's a season preview for the Bucks, so a very, very Bucks heavy show that we have. And spoiler alert, Camille, I figured out a couple of ways to work in Chris Livingston. And Josh seemed very open to it. I think we found somebody else in the Chris Livingston hive.
So what you're telling me is that you're just going around and converting people into Chris Livingston.
I'm trying. I'm going to die trying.
Sounds like Josh was ready for it, though. So continue your ministry of the goodness of Chris Livingston.
What I'll give away is this. One of the questions that Josh does ask you is, what is one bold prediction for next season? And I'm kind of out of the bold prediction business, right? Yeah. But I don't know what's really bold about this team. I think the boldness happened last season where you flirted with that and then you realize, hey, this isn't me. It's like when you get a different haircut and what do you think? No, not you. Like, all right, let's go back to what we did before. That's kind of where we're at with the Bucks and these bold type of proclamations. But what I did go with, and you can hear the reasoning why on the show with Josh, Chris Livingston will play in 50 or more games this season. The Bucks play 82 games this season. And as we went through that schedule yesterday, we did the unenviable task of first not seeing a calendar view and just kind of looking up line by line and trying to figure out, wait, is that a back-to-back? Is that a back-to-back? And shared our thoughts on the back-to-backs. I think there was one more this year than there was last year. There was a lot more home back-to-backs. The way the schedule starts, the way it closes, we spent some time talking about that. I don't know if you have it up in front of you as well, but when we talked about the national games, 17 for the Bucks, non-NBA TV games, and the split was 1 ABC, 7 TNT, and 9 ESPN games. That was basically around the middle of the pack for the league.
Yeah, so looking at the national TV games for each team, if you exclude NBA TV, let's exclude NBA TV first. I know a lot of people say like, well, I don't have NBA TV or we don't count NBA TV. The Bucks are 10th, if my math is correct here, on that list of national TV games, excluding NBA TV. The Lakers have 29 games. The Celtics have 26. The Warriors have 24, as well as do the Knicks. And then you have Dallas with 23, Denver with 22, Philly with 21, Phoenix with 19, Minnesota with 18, and then you get to Milwaukee with 17 national TV games, excluding NBA TV. If you add NBA TV back into the mix, then the Bucks are tied for 8th most national TV games with the Philadelphia 76ers with 27 in total, and those numbers go up for like the Lakers having their by far number one in the league when it comes to national TV games with 39 national TV games this year, including NBA TV. But if you look at just the Eastern Conference, including all of the games, NBA TV included, you have the Celtics with 34, the Knicks with 34, and then you have Milwaukee with 27. So in the Eastern Conference, there are only 2 teams with more national television games than the Bucks. The Philadelphia 76ers also have 27 as well. So my question to you, Justin, is do you think that that's right? Or do you feel like the Bucks should have been on more national TV games? Or is it more of a thing of just where those games are being aired that gives you the most like, I didn't expect that?
I think it's largely right. I think the biggest takeaway that I had was, what we talked about yesterday of just the one ABC game. I know the Bucks haven't been an ABC staple per se, but just one, like not just featuring the Bucks, but the Bucks not even as the opponent on ABC was what kind of stood out to me, especially with the landscape of the East. When you think about The Bucks and the Knicks, a possibility there. The Bucks and the Celtics and what that would bring. We do see the Bucks and the Sixers. We talked about the rivalry thing too with Rivals Week, that it not only wasn't Bucks and Pacers, but I mean, that could be a national game, an ABC game of Bucks and Pacers. So I think that was the biggest thing that surprised me the most. And look, I think we get it when you see what Philly did in the offseason, the fact that the Knicks are back and the market that they carry, the Celtics are the reigning champions, and just the overall influx of young talent, right? That when we joked about the Christmas Day schedule saying, hey, I mean, actions have consequences. You lost in the first round 2 years in a row. I think that's part of what we're seeing here. But I also think it's a league that's at a very, very healthy place right now with the young talent that they have.
It really is. I mean, the Timberwolves are one of those young teams that are really taking that jump when it comes to getting exposure on national TV. They're opening night and they're on Christmas Day as well. So that's a team that came in and was like, we're kicking the door down with Anthony Edwards and everything that's going on around him. But I feel similar. Like when I looked at, like, based on conferences where the Bucks national games landed, and I was like, I get Boston having more games than Milwaukee, defending champs. Okay. I get the Knicks having more because of their offseason moves, how far they made in the playoffs last year, and the market itself. And it's like, okay, and then here come the Bucks and the 76ers tie, which was like, I get it for the 76ers because they're a new look team in addition to their market. And then the Bucks, of course, with the star power they have with Dame and with Giannis as well. So it actually feels right to me in the full, like, makeup of how it all fell together. And then looking at the fact that there's so many teams in the West with the heavy national schedule, which again makes sense because of how cutthroat that playoff race in the West is going to be. Like when I have to sit down and really try to figure out my playoff teams and predictions, the West is going to be a difficult challenge to try to predict.
And I mean, speaking of, Camille, as we just mentioned, there is no offseason on Locked On NBA or Locked On Bucks. We are going to go through that study and that practice of really starting to preview the conference here for the Bucks. It's reached the point too where divisional previews are important. It's no longer you can marker in the Bucks as the Central Division champion. And we mentioned it before too, the over-unders we will get into in the coming weeks here. And the win totals, I don't know how we're going to phrase it, but the draft that you, me, and Frank are going to do. So now we know the schedule. We basically know the roster. And now it's just kind of putting all of those pieces into place and starting to get ready for this upcoming season. But again, go read the story that Jim Ozarski did on Damian Lillard. I think we just kind of hit the high notes on it. A lot more to take away from that. And if you needed any more reason, there's a lot of things to like and reasons to root for Damian Lillard within that story. If you missed any of the schedule reaction, we just went through the high level. It's really tough early. It's really tough late, except for those last two games of the season against the Pistons, back-to-back games. No other real broad takeaways. Like we kind of joked after we finished that of kind of a boring schedule for the Bucks. There's no Christmas Day game. There's nothing really to react to with this. And as we've kind of said all throughout the offseason, I think that's a good spot for the Bucks to be in, to just everything about them so far under the radar. When we go through who had the best offseason, which we'll also do, Bucks are not getting mentioned. I saw the Athletic story had them
like 18, right?
Yeah. That's where they're at with everything. And again, that's probably a good place to be for the Bucks. It's a good place for us to wrap up as well. So if you missed the schedule reaction show, go check that one out from yesterday. We'll be back next week and start to put the pieces together here with the schedule in place and get you ready for this upcoming season. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.